The federal moratorium on evictions is unconstitutional, a federal judge in Texas ruled last week, siding with property owners in the Lone Star State. They have argued that the U.S. government does not have the power to stop evictions. Is this the end of free rent? How does this affect renters and landlords in Texas? And does this apply to other states? What can be done to help renters in need without trampling on the rights of landlords? All this and more in today's video. Hello and welcome to the Stephen Carlson Show. I'm Stephen Carlson. I'm a tech entrepreneur, real estate investor, author, YouTuber, paramedic, and Bonnie just joined us in the studio, and Clyde, you saw him a second ago. And before I go any further, very quick reminder, as of course all my regular viewers will already know, that I have a team of outstanding lawyers that I keep chained up in the basement, and Clyde keeps them from escaping. The only problem with these lawyers, they get a little bit rowdy whenever I make a video, and the only way to calm them down is to give a quick disclaimer. I'm not a lawyer, so this is definitely not legal advice in this video, nor is this tax advice, blah, 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 blah. You get the point. And while I have you here, don't forget to check out Webull, link down below. Deposit $100, get your 2 free stocks. A few weeks ago, one of my viewers received an Apple stock. Or if stock investing is not exactly your thing, then you should check out the pinned video that is below, where you can get the equivalent of 40 free lottery tickets every single week. Okay, all that out of the way, on to today's video. MarketWatch is reporting Campbell Barker, federal district judge in the Eastern District of Texas, ruled that the powers granted to the federal government in the Constitution to regulate interstate commerce do not give them the authority to issue a national ban on evictions amid the pandemic. This ruling came as part of a lawsuit that was originally filed in October by a group of Texas landlords that claimed that they were owed thousands of dollars in unpaid rent, and the moratorium on evictions violated their property rights. This is only one of many federal lawsuits that are seeking to overturn the eviction ban. A little quick background. The U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, first issued its nationwide eviction moratorium back in September under the Trump administration. Public health officials argued that the moratorium was necessary to keep struggling renters housed, and that a massive wave of evictions could hasten the spread of the virus. Under President Joe Biden, the CDC has opted to extend this moratorium to give renters more protection as the pandemic continues. We find ourselves in a bit of a precarious situation. Back when the eviction ban was first set, there was widespread concern that mass evictions would stress the community services that provide shelter to displaced families. And fear of overcrowding caused additional spread of the virus to get worse. While I'm not here to debate the pros and the cons of a nationwide eviction ban, I think that we can all agree better ways that Congress could have implemented this and would have solved the problem so that families still had their homes without leaving the landlords holding the bag. Now, let's just focus on the legal aspects and how this impacts all of us going further. And because the lawyers that I've chained up in the basement, they're a little bit camera shy, let's go over to attorney Steve Leto.
A federal judge in Texas ruled that the law is unconstitutional regarding a national moratorium that the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, has instituted for most residential evictions during the pandemic. So there's a bunch of laws on this in a bunch of different states. So we are not necessarily addressing all of the laws. We're simply addressing the law that came down from the CDC. So the question then becomes, if it strikes down the one from the CDC, would it strike down the other ones if they got into court? So siding with a group of landlords and property owners challenging the freeze on evictions, a U.S. District Judge in Tyler, Texas, ruled that the CDC exceeded its authority under the Interstate Commerce Clause of the United States Constitution. And so a lot of people will ask, when a law gets passed or a rule comes down from Washington, D.C., what right does Washington have to pass that particular law? And you'll often hear about the Commerce Clause. And in the Constitution, it says that the Congress has the right to regulate interstate commerce. That I'm simply pointing out that that is their rationale. So the question then becomes, if the CDC is going to get involved in a moratorium on evictions of residential housing, how is that interstate commerce? And that became the issue here. The judge wrote, the court concludes that the federal government's Article I power to regulate interstate commerce and enact laws necessary and proper to that end does not include the power to impose the challenged eviction moratorium. The judge was appointed to the bench just in 2019 and said, although the COVID-19 pandemic persists, so does the Constitution. Barker said he expected the CDC to abide by his ruling and cease enforcement of the CDC's moratorium order, which is imposed in September and extended on January 21st to run at least another 2 months. The judge said, so the court chooses not to issue an injunction at this time.
Now, this is very interesting. As the court so elegantly put it, although the COVID-19 pandemic persists, so does the Constitution. I think this is an essential point made by the judge, taking all the emotions out of the mix and the perceived ways of how we may want the laws to be written. Currently, as it stands, the U.S. Constitution protects a person's ownership in a property. In this case, that's the landlord. They own that property. Judge Barker stated in his decision, quote, no federal law requires that a landlord give possession of a dwelling in the first instance to a person who cannot pay rent and who would otherwise live in congregate housing. The federal order against evicting such persons is thus not subordinable as a backstop to avoid undercutting such a broader regulation, end quote. Because this is a federal judge, now, does this apply to the entire country, or is this just part of Texas? For that, let's go back to Steve.
The judge's ruling noted the lawsuit in Texas does not call into question numerous eviction freezes or rent assistance programs instituted at the state and local level. So I can tell you I'm familiar with different situations in Michigan where, for instance, a city has said we will not handle any evictions for the time being. Now, they haven't said what's going to happen when that moratorium ends. They said right now you can't evict anybody. And there's been other areas that have done that. So this is simply talking about the CDC's ability as a federal entity to pass laws covering the states and so on.
As Steve points out, this is only a decision on the CDC's nationwide eviction ban. It does not stop any local town, county, state, etc. from having their own eviction ban policies. And while this does not prevent those local municipalities from refusing to process evictions within their local courthouse, I think it does give landlords at least a foot in the door to begin the process of fighting. Is this fair? Should landlords be allowed to evict non-paying renters during a pandemic when so many people are unemployed? As I said a few minutes ago, this is a complicated situation that has a lot of moral and legal questions to it. Currently, as the law stands in many areas, if a landlord provides utilities such as power, gas, water, etc., it is illegal for them to shut this off, and in some cases it's even a criminal offense to shut it off for unpaying tenants. Which, on the surface, sounds appropriate. Just imagine a world where landlords could turn power on and off to your house when it's 10 degrees outside and snowing just because you're a day late on rent. This is inhumane, and I think that most of us would agree that society would not approve such action. However, if we take the situation a little further and think about it, if a tenant does not pay their rent for 8 months or possibly even an entire year during the pandemic, should the landlord be on the hook for hundreds or possibly thousands of dollars per month per unit for utility costs? A small apartment building with 10 units could easily see a $4,000 per month utility cost. Plus, you tack on mortgage, property taxes, insurance, etc., and the landlord can easily be on the hook for $10,000 per month for a single building. How can independent landlords afford to pay for this every single month? I know some of you will say there are federal rent assistance, utility assistance, and even mortgage assistance programs for the landlord. They're going to be fine. It is far more important to keep the tenants in a safe home rather than on the streets. Well, once again, on the surface, that makes sense. I don't want people kicked out on the streets. But under the current rules, the tenants are the only ones that can apply for many of these programs. If they just simply refuse to apply, the landlord gets no assistance money. Additionally, many of the utility programs just pause the payments, and the landlord is still on the hook for that when the pandemic is over. But in many cases, the tenants are just going to move on to a new apartment because they're not going to have the money to be able to pay back the 1 year past due rent. So what are your thoughts on this? Why don't you comment down below and share? Personally, I wish Congress would have made this a little bit more of a straightforward program for rental assistance, allowing landlords to apply for the program on behalf of their tenants, rather than just giving renters a blanket protection from evictions, even if they refuse to submit the paperwork for rental assistance programs. Don't forget to check out Steve Leto's great YouTube channel where he breaks down very complicated legal discussions so non-lawyers can understand it. The link will be down below. Thank you very much for watching. Please make sure you click like and subscribe. Doing so really helps the YouTube algorithm. I appreciate it, as do once again, Sleeping Clyde. Oh, he looked up at me. And Bonnie's over there. Thanks, and I'll see you on the next one.